Started researching. I went to New Bremen in Ohio, and there's so much information that I wanted to share with everybody, so I'll get right into it. Some of the topics I'm going to talk about today are the history of New Bremen and the furniture manufacturing in New Bremen, and especially the Auglaize Furniture Company, which you saw the desk up there. Okay, where is New Bremen? It's in Ohio, of course. That is a view of Ohio, and in the eastern portion, if you're familiar with towns like Wapakoneta, Van Wert, Salina, Lima, how about Dayton? Anyways, north of Dayton. So, but it's in Auglaize County. There's a river by the name of Auglaize River, and the village of St. Mary's is also significant on this too. So. Okay, just to start out, a little brief history. In 1832, 33 immigrants in Cincinnati formed the Bremen Society, and they sent 2 scouts northward looking for a place to relocate another town, and they went up following the Great Miami River and some of the trails. If you're familiar with the Fort Wayne Trail, there was the Loramie Trail, which was a fort in Ohio. Ended up near the edge of the Black Swamp, and there was a Indian village, had been an Indian village there, and they located their town there. It's kind of on a north-south divide, and if you're familiar with the north-south continental divide, south of Elkhart, between here and Napanee, similar. So the immigrants were skilled at draining swamps and farming, and think of the Dutch settlers in Goshen that drained the swamps there and began the celery bogs and so on. But you'll see in a minute that the scouts likely knew that there was a canal being built, and they wanted the town probably along that canal as well. But you'll see the village of Bremen was platted in 1833, and that coincides very closely with the village of Elkhart in 1832. But the name was changed to New Bremen or New Bremen later because of a town east of Dayton, or east of Columbus, excuse me, by the same name. So I talked about the canal. There's the canal systems in Ohio, and you'll see in a minute from the inset here that the Great Miami Erie Canal that connected and went up to the town of Toledo. And you can see the different rivers there, and the town of New Bremen right about the center between the two there. And I always thought that when I was researching this, some of the history that I found, it would have been likely that Dr. Beardsley would have probably traveled some of these trails on his way to Fort Dearborn. Miami Erie Canal began construction in 1825, and that's why I say they would have surely known that it was coming that direction. It reached New Bremen in 1838 and opened between Cincinnati and Toledo in 1846, merged with the Wabash and Erie Canal. It was the highest point on the canal. As I mentioned, it was on a continental divide. So Lock 1 was located in the middle of town, and it still is to this day. They reconstructed that in 2008, and they have a park there. You can see the statue of the horse and a handler there. I did do got a lot of information on canals and such, but the canal boats were similar to the river boats that applied the rivers in Elkhart. So it was a vital form of commerce at that time. Early development grew because of the canals, and supplied a lot of jobs. Of course, there was a lot of lumbering, and I thought it was interesting that pork packaging was a major industry there. In 1869, they produced over 10,000, slaughtered over 10,000 hogs in 5 different packing plants. And Sinclair noted in one of his articles, called it the hog butcher of the world. That diminished somewhat over the years. But obviously the canal brought a lot of commerce to the area. But there was a flood in 1913 that destroyed the canals. If you're familiar with the Great Flood of 1913, it destroyed much of Dayton. It remains the largest weather event in recorded history. Nearly 500 people lost their lives, thousands of businesses and homes were damaged. But the more I research this, the more I find out. But you can see from that photo, it was also an integral part of the community. This is a firemen's convention that used the canal boat for their convention. The Dayton and the Michigan Railroad, which later became B&O, went from Cincinnati to Toledo, but it was 10 miles to the east of the town of New Bremen. So they'd have to take their goods by wagon to the nearest town of Botkins. But later, the Lake Erie and Louisville Railway later became the nickel plate, went from Sandusky to Rushville, Indiana. That went through St. Mary's, and that was another opportunity. The businessmen in town wanted the railroad to come through their town, and they put up more than half the money for them to build a branch through New Bremen later than in 1871. And then of course the Ohio Electric Railway had a interurban spur that went through the town of New Bremen from St. Mary's. And that was pretty much the end of the canals. And again, during the flood, it destroyed the canals system completely. Okay, early manufacturing had a plow company, similar to the Oliver Plow Company in South Bend. And they had an automobile company around the same era as the Pratt automobile in Elkhart. That only lasted about 3 to 4 years. They were kind of vague about the end of that company. And the New Bremen Bridge Company, we had the Elkhart Bridge and Iron here. That was significant for them because when the flood of 1913 destroyed the canals, it also destroyed a lot of railroad bridges, and that was a big factor in the growth of that company. But by 1929, they were out of business, and it became a different company. Furniture manufacturing. Have the Heinfeld Manufacturing Company. You can see the progression. They didn't coincide so much, but there were a lot of people manufacturing furniture around that era. And the Auglaize Furniture Company replaced the Auglaize Furniture Company. And a couple more here. The Auglaize Specialties Company and Herman Leitz Furniture Shop. And I'll talk a lot more about him and the Thiesing Craft, which was more just kitchen cabinets. The Heinfeld Manufacturing Company. Herman Heinfeld purchased a furniture business and began in 1873. I thought it was interesting he also manufactured coffins and he became an undertaker. By 1878 he'd given up the furniture manufacturing business, devoted himself to being a general contractor and an undertaker. And it was ironic that the last coffin he made was for his father, by the way. But in 1894, a large fire destroyed his business, but the town got together with a GoFundMe program, and they soon replaced the buildings. And by 1900, he was a baron in town with sawmills and planing mills and such. That's just a sketch of his company. And this is some of his employees, and they will go on to work in the other factories as well. But the photograph that's from the book of information here points out some of the defects, such as a bandaged finger. They point out the man covering his hand with a hat, possibly a missing finger. And I saw man with the glove looks like it could be an artificial hand. But whatever the situation, it was a hazardous business. Heinfeld went out of business at manufacturing furniture. The Klonke brothers took over, and it was the Klonke Brothers and Company Furniture Factory, and it was then later incorporated as the Auglaize Furniture Company. That's a photograph of their plant, and that was a wooden building, but just notice the street there, because Herman Street, you'll see that later. And this is a photograph of the brothers. They have a salesman's sample in front of them there. The salesman's sample, as you can see, you'll compare that to the additional furniture here. This is from the museum in New Bremen, the Klonke kitchen cabinet. Another variation, but you can see how similar they look. And if you were watching earlier, I compared that to some of the Kappas cabinets from Napanee. The Kappas brothers got started around that same era. In the 1800s, they manufactured the wooden crates for Dr. Miles' nervine. So, exclusively, I should say. These are from Facebook, and you can see this has probably been refinished in someone's home, but still the similar pattern. They also made the wardrobes, so you'll see what kind of furniture they manufactured. And compare that to the wardrobe that's on the second floor at Havel Beardsley. It's not a Klonke furniture cabinet as I wasn't able to determine, but I don't believe it is. But it's very similar. A fire destroyed the Klonke Furniture Company in 1913, but the businessmen wanted a new factory built. A lot of employees were out of work, and so it didn't take them long to raise the money and build a new factory. But they weren't going to have a big wooden building like the one that caught fire. But it's named the Auglaize Furniture Company, and I mentioned many of the workers came from there. One of the workers was Herman Leeds, and I'll talk much more about him in a little bit. He became the superintendent. It was a one-story building, and it was very well built. Regrettably, the Depression took its toll, and the company was idle by 1933. And I mentioned the building. There's a picture of the new building, and mentioned the sawtooth roof. It was a very modern design, had ventilation. The windows opened up for ventilation, but had the skylights there, and steam heat. So it was a much more modern building. But and I mentioned that building, part of that building is still in use as offices for a company that's still there. All right, we get down to the Auglaize Furniture Company, and that's a seal that's inside the drawer of most of the desks or the library tables that you'll see. You can't read it very well, but I've deciphered it there. The Auglaize line, beautiful, durable, and convenient. Okay, why is it called a 3-in-1 library table? I've had that question a couple of times. That's a good question. It's a library table. It's a little shorter than the average desk, and it would be suitable for any library, and which there is one in the library. It's also a desk. We have the drawer. I'll concede that it's not really that comfortable because of the shelf along the bottom. As a desk, it's not too great. But it's also bookcases. The panels on the end raise up to conceal the books that are inside. So hence the term 3-in-1. It was a marketing feature, I suppose, calling it that. That happens to be a picture of Gene's library table. But these are just some variations on there, and these are from the Auglaize, the New Bremen Historic Association at their museum. But you can see the similar design. It's somewhat of a mission style, slightly different shapes and colors. Some more variations, the smaller legs, the solid top across instead of the inset top, and the contoured edge on the top on that one, and of course the decorative legs. And you don't see it so well, but there's a little pendant style drawer pulls, similar to the one in the garage at Ruthmere. And even the end panels, the doors had variations. I suspect that the one on the right might have had some, might have been a custom built, custom feature. But what I'm really going to talk about is the patented desk drawer. That's a photograph from the museum of the desk drawer. And you see the pop-up design there. And Herman Leitz was the man that patented that desk drawer. But trust me, he did have the patent, and they provided that from the museum. This is a picture now of our desk drawer. First, you pull it out partway, and you can store everything normally. A little further, and you see that pop-up feature there. And when that pops up, you have a place for notes, bills, or whatever. It's got a little pencil box there. And the original design showed a writing surface that would fold down and cover the front of it there. I haven't seen one with that feature existing anymore, but you can see the pegs there where it would have been set in there. And there are similar screws up in the desk in the library. So, but now Herman Leitz, as I mentioned, he was with the Auglaize Furniture Company, came with the employees to the Auglaize Furniture Company, and after they closed, he and a partner, Dr. Briggs, purchased the business and renamed it the Auglaize Specialties Company. But they went out of business in 1936. And it didn't last that long. But Herman and his son was getting older, and he decided to open up his own shop, the Herman Leitz Furniture Shop. And it opened in 1939, went into business with his son. He mostly did repairs, 40 cents an hour, as you can see, 60 cents if he had to use power tools. But Paul joined the Army during the war, and his father died while he was in the Army. So when Paul came back, he reopened the business, and it was in business until his death in 1996. And just a picture in 1935 of Herman and his son Paul, and his shop there. Now I mentioned Thiesing craft, and I just want to say a couple things about Reuben Thiesing. He was also a furniture maker, and he opened his shop later, making the kitchen counters, the more modern style, and the cabinets, things that we see. But he was also a craftsman, and there's an article in a page back on the table there about him. He actually invented a machine to cut pieces to restore a floor in the Veterans Building in Cincinnati. He was 96 years old, and talks about him. He would go in the morning and work all day. They had to make him, they'd bring in food for him, or he wouldn't even stop to eat. He'd leave late at night. But even at that age, we're talking about some serious craftsmen here, at least. But New Bremen today, it's a population of around 3,000 people. I can tell you they don't have a Subway or a McDonald's. When we went, well, we had to go to another town to get something to eat. The town just south of there that does have a McDonald's. So, but it's the home of Crown Equipment Company, and if you're familiar with the Hall lift trucks, at one time they were prime seller of Crown lift trucks. So the two brothers started the business in 1945, making controls for wood-fired furnaces, and they began producing rotors for TV antennas later, and then branched out into other electronics. In 1957, they began manufacturing lift trucks, and in 1988, the company was officially renamed Crown Equipment Company. Today, it's the 5th largest manufacturer of lift trucks in the world. And as I mentioned before, the Auglaize Furniture Company building is occupied by some of their offices. A little bit more about the desks. I don't know if you've seen the desk in the garage here at Ruthmere, you'll recognize that. The chauffeur's cap gives it away. I mentioned before the pendant style drawer pulls. Those were not the common style, but that was purchased here by the Ruthmere Foundation in 1978, purchased locally from an antique shop. It has a standard drawer. I call it standard. It does not have the patented drawer with the compartments in it, but it's in pretty good shape. This picture makes it look a little bit nicer than usually appears in the garage, but we don't have spotlights on it in the garage either, and probably not going to. Right?
Maybe now.
Maybe now. Oh. And the one in the Arts Reference Library, that is a newer design, and that does have the patented desk drawer. I didn't pull it out and take photographs of it. I was told that it would be available if people want to go up to the reference library and look at it. But it is a Ruthmere artifact, so please don't handle it a lot. And I will caution you that the door cover for the bookcase is loose, so they're.
So good.
But I'll just end. I do want to thank Ruthmere for the opportunity here. And a special thanks to Dree and Rose for saving my butt today, because my computer wasn't compatible with the projector here. And I do want to thank Genevieve Conradi. I say her name all the time, but she was very helpful. I would email her with questions, and she would always send back about 3 more answers than what I asked.